Okay. The title of my message today is Obtaining the Samaritan Reputation. And who's familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan? Just about everybody, right? Just as a recap, the Good Samaritan is basically about someone who's traveling to Jericho. And on his way over, he got jumped by a bunch of thieves. He was beaten up nearly to the point of death and was abandoned there. There were 3 people who came to him, or rather, who passed by him. The first one was a priest, the second was a Levite, and the third was a Samaritan. Obviously, the story is called the Good Samaritan because the Samaritan was the one who did something about it. But analyzing this story, first of all, the thing about this story is that what started the whole thing was that Jesus was sitting down and he was approached by a man of the law. And the man of the law was trying to test Jesus. He said, "Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life?" Now, the thing I like about Jesus the most is that he never just answers a question, right? He always answers a question with another question. Don't you just hate that? I do. But his response was, "What do you see? What does it read to you?" And the man of the law was saying, "Well, it says to love your God with all your heart, mind, body, and soul, and to love your neighbor." Jesus responded, "Do this and you will have eternal life." So then the man tried to trick him again, tried to back him in the corner. He says, "Well then, who is my neighbor?" Instead of just simply answering the question, of course, Jesus came up with the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, the Good Samaritan, this story is really awesome because it teaches you about who your neighbor is. When we think of neighbor, the definition of a neighbor is someone in close proximity to you. It's someone that you know. And in the Bible times, it's someone who you shared cultural similarities with. You know, people just they were, one particular culture. Those were considered your neighbor. But Jesus was trying to get him to understand that to be good to all men, you have to consider all men your neighbors. Because we're all on the same earth. So you see what I'm saying? So technically speaking, we are all neighbors. You don't normally consider someone from Florida or someone from New York a neighbor unless a New Yorker like myself comes down to Texas and lives with you guys. Now I'm your neighbor. But the idea of a neighbor in what Jesus was trying to establish was someone that you wouldn't least expect. Just everyone, basically. Kind of said it kind of weird, but it's all good. The story of the Good Samaritan was basically, as I stated in a summary, was that a Jewish man was on the road towards Jericho. And when he was beaten, when he was nearly dead, 3 people came up to him. The priest. Now, the priest is the first that you would expect to help him out. The priest was a man of God. It was basically his sworn duty to help someone in need. I mean, that's why you become a priest. You come to serve. But notice how he was the first person to approach this man, but he was also the first to abandon him. And that's just foul, right? Mm-hmm. The second one was a Levite. If you don't know what a Levite is, basically Levites were kind of the assistants to the priest. So a Levite was basically next in line. And he was also the next to abandon him. And now comes the Samaritan. And if you don't know what a Samaritan is, basically what I'm trying to say is that a priest and a Levite were considered, culturally speaking, they were considered holy. They were considered clean people. You don't ever look you look down on a priest and a Levite. But a Samaritan was someone, in their culture, they were polytheistic. They believed in more than one God. They had intermarried with Jewish people, which is why the Jews hated him. And by the way, the person that was asking Jesus this question was a Jew. So, Jesus likes to turn things around and really challenge us. And he challenged this man. So he used the Samaritan to get his point across. The least likely person that this man of the law would want to admit did the right thing. The Samaritan was the one that showed the act of generosity. The Samaritan was the one that showed goodness to his neighbor. And at the end of it all, Jesus asked the man, who was the one that showed love for your neighbor? And, well, he had to admit, it was a Samaritan. I don't want to admit it, but it was a Samaritan. Now, when I think of parables of Jesus Christ, they really mean something because they apply to our everyday lives. And I actually want to share a story with you of a recent account of a Samaritan. You've probably seen this in the news. I saw it not too long ago. But there was an account in Richmond, California. A 15-year-old girl was coming out of her homecoming party at school, and she was confronted by 5 guys. And, they started drinking and all that. Next thing you know, the guys turn on her and they start beating her. They start, torturing her and making a public spectacle of her out in public. And the most disturbing part about this is that there were 15 bystanders who were just watching this happen. You think the first person to show up would be the first person to say, "Oh my gosh, check it, what's going on here? I need to call the cops." No. The second person came, same deal. They just watched. Third, fourth, fifth, 15 people watching this happen. And you know what the report was saying? That they were laughing, mocking, taking pictures and videos on their cell phones of a 15-year-old girl being abused in public by 5 guys. Finally, there was one girl inside the school that was told of what was going on, and she called the cops. And she was the one to take the stand. But you think about why did it take 15 people watching this? And also the account says that not all of them were from the school. Some of them were strangers. They just passerbyers basically. Now, that's kind of disturbing, right? But again, the title of my message is Obtaining the Samaritan Reputation. And when I say that, I don't mean becoming polytheistic, the way that Samaritans were considered at the time. What I mean is showing that love for the neighbor. And again, a neighbor is not just someone that you share cultural similarities with. A neighbor, when Jesus was talking about showing love to a neighbor, is just anyone, because this Jewish man in the story who was beaten up, Jews by reputation were considered those who hated Samaritans, yet the Samaritan took pity, brought him to the inn, and took care of him without any conditions. So the reason why I bring this up, the reason why I state this, love for your neighbor and all that, is also relating to the fact that many of us, now I'm not accusing anyone here, but in my accounts, growing up and all that, seeing people, and even in some cases of myself, we've been like the priest and the Levite when it came to someone insulting the name of God, of Christ. When someone uses their name in vain, if you're in school and you're with your friends and your friends are saying, gosh, all that, just using the Lord's name in vain and making fun of him and all that. Or even if you're hanging around atheists and, they're talking bad about, Christianity and Jesus Christ and all that, do we always stand up? Or are we kind of timid sometimes, right? Because, just think about the 15 bystanders. There's actually a psychological, social study about this that, tries to explain why people would rather stand by and partake in something like this instead of using your common sense and calling the cops. They state that basically just the social pressures of wanting to fit in is so great that we neglect our better intellect. We neglect our better judgment. And I'm guessing that's the case with the priest and the Levite. It says in Matthew 25, verse 44 and 45, it says, "They also will answer, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing of clothes or sick or in a prison and did not help you?' He will reply, 'I tell you the truth. Whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me.'"
That's right.
And this is a really cool thing that I'm going to get to in a minute. But this has to relate with neighbors. Again, it says, "What you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." So when we're hanging out with people